Hello and welcome to Do You See What I See? I'm Yolanda Nava. I am delighted to bring you today's guest. He's the highly acclaimed artist, Miguel Martinez. Welcome, Miguel.
Hi, Yolanda. Thanks for having me.
Wonderful. It's wonderful to have you here. And I would love to give you a big New Mexican abrazo. You
Oh,
have you have been known for your uh, multitude of stunningly beautiful faces of women.
right.
You've done many of these faces. Why did you decide to make women's faces your trademark of creativity?
You know, I knew you were going to hit me up with a hard question right off the bat. And plenty of people ask me this over the years. Who are these women? Or be honest with you, I don't have a clear answer to it. Although um, this started, I would say, back in right around, I'd say the 80, 79, 80. I guess I could say I was partially influenced by Diego Rivera and Modigliani, and you can go on from there, Picasso to oh um, Gustav Klimt, people like this. So it was a wide range of people that I was influenced by, and nowadays where I'm at now, I'm trying to figure out, well, for myself, you try and trace back why are you painting women still? And I get that question asked quite often, and so I'm kind of trying to find why I've done this for so many years, and it's a long process, hard.
It's a long process, but your work is magnificent. I own one of your works that I got, I think back in the 80s or 90s. I'm not sure, on one of my trips to Taos and Santa Fe.
Right.
And it's in my living room. You can't see it from where we're positioned, but it's a magnificent piece, and I love it. I fell in love with your work when I was first traveling to New Mexico, and so
Well, thank you.
when I interviewed you for It's All in the Frijoles, and so here we are, almost 25 years, 24 years later, on a Zoom together. So it goes to show that we're part of the same frijoles family, and have you here. And you're in good company because there's I think one of your influences too was, not Tamayo, uh, the, oh God, I'm forgetting his name right now. I'm just blanking.
Zuniga.
Anyway, we'll
Zuniga.
keep going. Zuniga. You're
Uh-huh.
catty corner to
Francisco.
Zuniga, Francisco Zuniga. Yeah.
Yeah, and he was also another influence on a little bit of my work, the women.
Yeah.
So yeah,
Well,
all
women
these
have been,
painters.
I'm sorry,
Go ahead.
you just broke up.
So a lot of these painters like Zuniga and they all painted women, and that's what has been intriguing me so much. Like why? Well, I'm in good company, and so I've been kind of researching on my own, and a lot of the work that I'm doing nowadays has to do with painters that have influenced me over the years, and not so much that I'm doing portraits of them, but I'm
Uh-huh.
being inspired by them, which all of us are inspired by each other, and we grow from each other's work. So it's kind of where I'm at this point.
But you said it, what I think I read, that you found in these women that you met around the world, that you saw and experienced around the world, a
Right.
quality, a character, a value system. Talk about that.
Well, I think it began probably from my mother's side, because my mother, four of us, um, grew up together, and my mother was a single mother. My father passed away when I was 5, so I think she was very strong, and that's where that comes from initially. My mother being such a strong woman, and I think that's where it all started. And as I started traveling around the world, you would see the influence, and where people depended a lot on their mother. Not that they didn't of their fathers, but they definitely a lot from their mothers.
Well, you grow up in Taos, and talk about the influences of growing up there, the influence of the people of the Taos Pueblo being there, the early Spanish settlers, your family's values and teachings. How did that all factor into making you the superb, magnificent, talented artist that you are?
Thanks. That's well, probably I've basically been involved in the arts through probably fourth grade. We used to have a painter come into the school system and work with the kids, and that was in the fourth grade. And so, kind of growing up from there, being influenced by all of the galleries that were around at the time and still are, some of the Taos founders in that, um, that was all a heavy influence probably on me. And becoming a jeweler, I guess that had something to do with it. I was a jeweler for 11 years. But the Pueblo, we never went out to the Pueblo very much when we were younger, but later on in life, we um, became acquainted and became very good friends with a lot of people from the Pueblo and the surrounding area, Taos, including a lot of my relatives. We're probably like a fourth generation here in Taos. So we've been here a long time, and our family dates back to the Pueblo Revolt.
Ah,
And some of my family had quite a bit to do with that. I won't go into that, but so a lot of those influences just came through, and being around a lot of the painters that were here at the time when I was growing up. Andrew Dasberg and Walt Gorman was around, and I knew a lot of these painters from growing up, Ravenella and all of the Taos Six, they called themselves. So it just goes on and on.
there's a very rich history there that unless you've been to, New Mexico, or you're looking at that particular type of art, uh, may go by the wayside. And I fell in love with Taos because I was introduced to Mabel Dodge Lujan by a professor at UCLA, and that drew me to New Mexico, and it drew me to Taos. And the in your landscape painting, which I was not familiar with until I looked at your bio more recently, what influence does the natural scape, the mountains, the rivers, the greenery, the sharp contrasts of weather, what influences does the natural surround of northern New Mexico have on your work?
Well, that has a big influence, although primarily they have to do with the women, but background landscape, where they came from, where uh, these women came from, that all has an influence on my work. You mentioned Mabel Dodge Lujan. Even her, my grandmother was one of her cooks. And so my mother grew up around them also from time to time. But the landscapes of the colors from the terrain, all that has something to do with what is what I incorporate into my work, along with other parts of I don't tend to consider myself just a Southwest painter. I tend to consider myself more of I like to venture out, in other words. So I don't want to be, I don't like the idea of being pigeonholed per se. So that's where a lot of these other painters came into play, being influenced by them.
Well, your work is totally unique, so one couldn't pigeonhole you. But there are the I was fascinated by some of the titles for your landscape paintings, and the High Road to Dallas, for example. And I remember one of my first trips to New Mexico, and we were driving the high road to Taos. It was a beautiful day, clear sky with big fluffy clouds, and we're winding up and up and up, going up into the mountains and going through Truchas and continuing on north. And the clouds were talking to me. They were forming shapes like Mickey Mouse, and they formed shapes like angels. I tell you, I saw angels and I saw Mickey Mouse in the clouds. And I thought, wow, what's going on here? This is mystical. This is magical. So there is something in the terrain, in just the sense of space there that had to have captured your attention, and it certainly influenced you.
Oh, it's definitely an influence, and even the terrain, the shape, the how they divided the land up, back in the day for the water rights and of everybody that would inherit property, how it would get divided up. Even as far down as the color of the earth and the different changing values of the earth, that all had an influence on my work and still does today. I can't think of any road that I haven't gone down where I've utilized that road in one way or the other in my work. And so and as of today, I still do the landscapes, and they're very large landscapes. I kind of return to them. My wife Rita is always telling me, you did such beautiful landscapes. How come you don't go back to them? I was like, I go back and forth, but it's always has predominantly the woman's face to begin with, and that's a whole different thing.
Well, it is a different thing, and it's you draw from a very deep place. I mean, you are unique. You're a truly unique artist, and your work captivates. You have the breadth of the work, and I'm just fascinated by how you continued. Where does that come from? Is it a divine spark? Is the talent a gift from the creator? Is it learned? Is it practiced? What does make an excellent, outstanding artist, magnificent artist, acclaimed artist such as yourself?
I've looked at, like I say, I've gotten back into all these different painters that have similarities in a sense. Like for instance, Matisse and Diebenkorn. Go figure. Diebenkorn had a lot of influence from Matisse. Well, or de Kooning, for instance, they were all influenced by these painters from the past, and myself being included. But it has to do something with more of a mystical, imaginary kind of. That's where they come from, and so I've always thought, well, most women would have a hard time hanging a painting of another woman in their, let's say, their bedroom. But in this case, it works really well. Not that I thought of it that way, but initially, I mean, later on in life, I realized, well, it's like women will hang a portrait of another woman, not being anybody in particular, and they love it. So it's a flip to me.
Yeah, it is.
And
It is a
more
flip.
than me.
I can remember, excuse me, when I interviewed the opera composer Daniel Catan for It's All the Frijoles. And he was asked a question, where his talent, where his efforts, how did he develop as a composer of opera, which is very challenging. He didn't plan to do that. He was a pianist at first, and he decided he wanted to compose opera. How do you do that? And he said it
Right.
was a process of doing it, the practice, that you do it over a period of time and you get better and better at it. Do you agree with that? Or is there something else
Yes, I
going
do.
on?
I do. Yeah, I agree with that because, well, I've been doing it for 40 some years now, painting the portraits of people. Where do they come from? Who are they? Well, I particularly refrain from answering that only because I prefer the other, people like yourself to inject their own feeling into it. Who are these people? I've had people say, well, they're I think of them as my relatives or my friends, and so yeah, I believe that. And so, but like I say, I've done them for over 40 some years, and I continue to paint them, large paintings, small paintings. It and now, like I say, I'm starting to incorporate things that I loved about, let's say, for instance, Matisse, his patterns that he used with his women that he painted. the patterns that he would paint. In fact, one of the paintings that I have behind me has that little bit of influence. And de Kooning is the same way. He painted landscapes in a certain way. Well, I look at de Kooning's, I mean, not de Kooning, but Diebenkorn. He painted landscapes in a certain way and that I love, but I utilize them in a way that, because I live in New Mexico, and so I push it in that direction, but you're influenced by them and you wonder where, wow, this is great. And you make the connection is what's really interesting.
Well, connection is something, and I think it's also a creativity. Let's talk about creativity, because
Mhm.
excuse me, I'm fascinated by it. As a writer, I have a creative process, that I use, and I am excited by that. And when you're in that process, it is a zone. It's an entirely different state of being, and it's I can tell that you love what you're doing because you're such a joyful being, and it comes through in your voice, and you can tell that, like when I even asked you, are you in your studio? Yes, I'm in my studio. And so you have that kind of energy flowing through you. So it is a fascinating process. I'm wondering if we're giving children these days, where art so often, the arts are not included in the school curriculums, and what
Right. Yeah.
impact that's going to have. I mean, I know in New York, when they went through a period some years ago where they took the arts out of the schools, public schools, and New York is the center of the art world in the world, and a major area of importance. And the artist community there gathered together and raised money to provide arts programs. So the programs are created by the artists themselves, not by the curriculum preparers for school programs.
Right.
And so
Yolanda, back, this was a number of years ago when I have two daughters, Danielle and Sierra, and when they were in grade school, well, at the time I was doing monotypes and etchings and so forth in the studio, and I had a press. And so what we would do is we would invite their classmates. At the time, they were probably 7, 8, 9 years old, and they would come in, and I'd have them face each other, whoever they wanted to, and they could draw each other with certain pigments that I use, certain paints that I would use. And then I would let them go to the press, and they would create a monotype from it, from the press. And they loved that sort of thing. So yeah, that's very important.
it's very important. We have a daughter, we have something in common. My daughter is Danielle also.
Oh,
And Danielle, when she was in elementary school, had an after-school art class that I, signed her up for. And
right.
I went there to pick her up, at the end of the class. And they always had Baroque music playing. Oh, it was
Oh,
so peaceful. I loved to go pick her up. And she was doing a pencil sketching of a parrot. And it was very gorgeous. It was really coming out beautifully. And
sure.
I went in, I said, are you ready to go? And she says, no, mommy. She says, I'm still working. You'll have to give me a few moments, something like that. But it was a magical moment because there was this Baroque music and this kind of focus and attention to this creative process.
Right.
And she hasn't kept up the art, but she did play the piano, and she would compose her own songs on the piano, and they were in minor keys, which is very unusual.
Yeah.
And one of her teachers did what you did for your daughter's classmates. He got the chords that she had composed. He played them on his computer at home, which had some kind of computerized something, and printed out the music for
Oh,
her.
really? Yeah, that's really interesting because one of the things that I was doing, well, I'm also in fact into the music part of it. I always carried a guitar around, but I never learned how to play it, right? So in the last 5, 6, 7 years, I've, at my time, I've learned how to play the guitar, but I've also related that to my work, and how does music relate to my work? Um, how did musicians, how did they live their life compared to how I'm living my life? It's very similar. That's very parallel in a lot of respects, but also just the painting itself. It's a language, just like singing. It's a what you do for a living. You write books. So it's all the same idea. Just I do it with color.
Yeah, but when you go to look at a blank piece of canvas, uh, what do you
Mhm.
see? What are you thinking? What's the process that you go through to put paint to
How do
paper?
how do you get there? You know, the first thing that Yolanda, that you have to do is get rid of the white, because white white basically kills color, and it's like if you can get past that, there's no such thing as making a mistake in a painting.
Right.
Um, no such thing. You can always correct it, but basically you need to get rid of the white, and for what I'm doing. But really, when I started painting, I generally I would sit down and I just started drawing, and depends on my mood, how I felt that day. What maybe I was in a melancholy kind of mood, or maybe I was in a great mood, and that would show up in the work as far as colors go, and um, that's how I start a piece anyway, and it just grows from there, and the painting basically in the end directs you, myself, which way to go.
All right. So would you call it, you say you see the end, or you have an intention to paint X or Y or Z?
Mm,
I'm trying to get where you go with it, because sometimes when I'm writing, I might just I might go off on a word, and I start, oh, I think about that, and then that takes me to something else. Like I started when I was just going to interview, and I was thinking about some questions I would ask you. I started thinking about the high road to Taos, and I ended up writing a couple of paragraphs about the high road to Taos.
that happens.
Yeah.
That happens if you pay attention to everyday life and you're in tune. Just like musicians, they pick up somebody's talking about something, before you know it, that's a song. Well, the same thing about when you first came on the computer. I said, in my own mind, well, there's a painting. And so things around you, if you're paying attention, they generate, uh, the direction that you can go in, or just what we're talking about, the high road to Taos, things like that. There's a lot of avenues you can take. It's, you know, even names, for instance, people's names have influenced a lot of my work. So yeah, when I first get going on something, it's not always like I have a final outcome. It's just I work until you know when to stop, and when it works, and in the end, I always used to say, well, you get to a certain point, and then you have to make it breathe and live, the painting itself, and then have a soul of its own, and that's where it's hard to explain. You just feel it, and that's
It calls to you. Something is calling to you. There is an interactive process that wants this, the work, the artwork or the book or whatever it is, the music wants to come alive.
right. Yeah, and you were talking earlier about where do you go, to find the inspiration, or where do we have to all go somewhere. It's like it's between the cracks. You go between the crack between night and day, and that's where you go to create. That that's where you go, and it's kind of a odd thing to say, but that's where I kind of think of it as, and I've heard other painters talk about it. You go between the crack between night and day, light and dark. That's where you go to find yourself or create.
Well, the creativity is the finding of self, and I think self with a little s and self with a big S, I think are important factors in creativity, which leads me to what do we do to foster creativity uh, and interest in the arts, because those are things which expand our awareness, whichever form it might take. How do we bring that into the schools back in, if it's not there, because it hasn't been in California for a while and in many schools around the country? And it almost becomes like something that's just limited to the few. And how do we how do we engage in the educational process? This idea of playing in the mud, of putting paint to paper, putting, we used to do figure paints and all that stuff in school, I remember.
Right.
What do we do in the public arena in the schools to help foster that kind of creativity?
Well, I think what possibly could happen is that people could do studio tours of artists' places of work, because a lot of kids, like you say, don't get that attachment to it. Like I used to have my girls and my grandkids hang around the studio and just paint and draw. And for kids that don't have that opportunity, just to come into the studio, and like I say, we used to do that. That would encourage them. And over the years, I've talked with kids that mentioned that we really loved coming into the studio and seeing this sort of thing. So I guess maybe that would be a step in that direction.